Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab. I am your host, Dr. Leslie Joseph. Thank you so much for joining me. And we're still talking about Palestine. We're talking about environmental justice in Palestine. I just, after watching the news, seeing the horror stories coming out of the Gaza Strip, the ways in which the people are struggling to just survive the onslaught, the war, the bombing, everything that's going on, I had to come here and tell you that environmental justice is another big part of the problem in Palestine. And so, just to recap, in case you don't know, the Palestinian territories are currently occupied by the neighboring country of Israel. They control what goes in, they control what comes out. And this has happened and has occurred for decades now. And so, as I was preparing for this series on environmental justice in Palestine, I had these ideas about talking about the water situation, talking about the sanitation and the wastewater situation, and thinking about food and thinking about air quality and all the different things that go into what it takes to have a society that's functional and vibrant, and how that's been undermined by the current situation in the occupied Palestinian territories. But then, as I was doing my research, I came across this article that I was sent that had an interesting statement in the title that I'm going to share and steal for this episode. And that statement was, peace will require environmental justice. It was a good statement. I have to tell you, it's a good statement because that person is absolutely correct. And of course, in the article, the context was that with the war happening, things are being destroyed, things are being demolished. And as part of the rebuilding efforts, you'll have to address that infrastructure and make sure it's back up and running. And that's providing the service that it needs to provide for the people that will eventually return to those parts of the Gaza Strip that were evacuated due to the war that was going on. You have to do it in a just way. And that was the context of the article. But I want to step back a little bit further because while that's true, it's also true that even before this war began, this particular current war, environmental justice was always a problem. It was always a problem. And the idea that we just need to go back in and rebuild and kind of return back to how things were before this war broke out is misguided, and it won't lead to peace, and it won't bring things back in order because they were never the way they should have been. I mean, let's just think about it. When you consider what life is like living in the occupied Palestinian territories, pick whichever one you want, the Gaza Strip or the West Bank or East Jerusalem, these areas are occupied by the Israeli government, the Israeli army, and they control the resources that go in and that come out of those areas. And they're not doing it in a just way. It's not as though the people who are Palestinian and people who are Israeli enjoy the same access and the same types of resources to live their lives and to raise their families. That's not the case at all. One group has considerably more access and more than the other. That's why it's unjust. That's why it can't continue. And even if you go back to what things were like before this war began, you're going to have a situation where the inequity and the constant disregard for the needs of the people living in Palestine are going to continue to provide instability and continue to lead to more and more hostilities between the two factions. It's just a matter of time, and it's just the way it is. It's the way it's always been. People shouldn't be surprised, right? I mean, if you look at any place in the world where one group of people has full, unfettered access to all that they need to live and thrive, and another group doesn't, and the government is responsible for that disparity, come on, you're going to have hostility. It's just the way it is. That's how it goes. That's just what's going to happen. And it would be silly to suggest otherwise, that somehow you can just have that unequal situation continue and continue for decades and nothing happen. That's just silly. You wouldn't expect that from your neighbors, let alone from countries and large institutions. So let's just be very clear about that. I mean, you know, if you go to Israel now, I don't think you'd be concerned about where your water came from. You wouldn't have any issues getting food for your family. You just wouldn't. You go to the store, you go to the market, you pay, you buy it, you take it home, you cook it, you eat it, you drink your water, drink whatever you want to drink, and you'll be fine. If you went to the Gaza Strip at any point, not just now, but at any point, that wouldn't be the case for you. You wouldn't be able to do things like that so freely and easily and feel comfortable and confident that you would have all that you needed. It just wouldn't be the case because there's a blockade around that territory. And nothing goes in and out of that territory without the country of Israel deciding. And they haven't decided in ways that benefit the people that live there. It's just a fact. I read one article that talked about how the Israeli government prevents so much food. They only let in enough food to meet the minimum calorie requirements for a person to survive on. That's how they decide what goes in and what goes out. Literally, the minimum possible to keep a person alive is what's allowed into the Gaza Strip. I read another article. It's talked about how 97% of the water in the Gaza Strip is undrinkable. It's undrinkable. It doesn't matter what the context is. Because if you live in a place where there's no water to drink, there's no food to eat, there's no place to go, no place to sleep, no shelter, no place to get medical care, nothing, and you can point to a government responsible for you being in that situation, you're going to have hostility. People are going to get upset and angry. There won't be peace. And that was the point of the article, and that's my point today in this episode. Peace will require environmental justice. If you are serious about peace, if you're serious about ending hostility, if you're serious about coexisting in a place for a long period of time, you need to ensure that there is environmental justice in that place. You have to do it. You can't be a serious person and think otherwise. It's not possible. I was thinking about this. So I did this thought experiment in my mind. And I said, when I read the articles about what Israel is doing and what Palestine is doing and what each of these different groups, the army and the militant groups in different places, what they're asking for, what they're doing, and what their demands are and how they want security and self determination, I said, I wonder what would happen. Like, think about this for a second. What would happen if Palestinians got everything they asked for? What if that happened? Right? I've read about ending the occupation, um, removing Israeli settlements in the West Bank, having elections, free and fair elections, um, having the opportunity to govern yourselves as an independent state. I was thinking about that and I said, what if Israel gave all of that to the Palestinian groups that were demanding it? What would life look like? Would that bring about peace? Doing those specific things just the way they want it. Declaring Palestine to be a state. Would that bring about peace? And as I thought about it, I realized I didn't have to actually imagine it because it actually happened, right? So in the Gaza Strip, I think it was 2007, Israel withdrew, pulled out all the settlers, everybody left, pulled out the army, everybody left, no more outposts, no more checkpoints, pulled out of the strip altogether. They had elections, voted in who they wanted to vote in. They did that. And, huh, did that bring about peace? Well, the obvious answer is no. We're in the worst war that I've ever seen currently. And so what happened? Why wasn't there peace? And I imagine if you were a pro kind of Israeli government supporter, you would point to that and you would say, "See, it doesn't matter what we do, they don't want peace. They don't want to end this until we are completely erased from the face of the earth." That's what I've read and heard in different interviews. The idea being that the governing authorities in the Gaza Strip want Israel to be completely annihilated. I think the quote is thrown into the sea, is what I keep hearing. And so that's one way to look at it. The more appropriate way to look at it is the reality that even though all those things did happen and that took place, the fact that there was still, in this case, environmental injustice surrounding the Gaza Strip created the kind of conditions and created the type of environment that people couldn't live in. You couldn't sustain yourself. It just wasn't possible. So there's a food blockade, there's a sea blockade, land and air and sea, and everything is blocked off. You've cut off this strip from the rest of the world, so much so they're relying on humanitarian aid just to survive. Half the people were unemployed. Critical supplies couldn't get into the territory. And so when we think about what is needed, it's environmental justice. It's clean water and available water that everybody can enjoy. It's food. It's clean air. It's having facilities that you can go to, parks and schools and hospitals and churches and mosques and all these different elements of society that keep us, a group of people, vibrant and active and enjoying themselves. That's what people want. That's what people need. They so if you don't have that, you won't have peace. You'll continue to have protests. You'll continue to have people who are angry. You'll continue to have demands set forth and people who are willing to go to extreme lengths to try to have those demands met. Peace will require environmental justice. You cannot get around it. You cannot say that we'll do everything else, but we still want to control these environmental resources that come to your territory, that come to your habitation. You can't do that and expect to have any kind of lasting peace. And so, that's all I wanted to share today. I mean, that it's really frustrating. It's really frustrating when you think about the fact that the stuff that I do here, like in the United States, the way I use water, how I eat food, and how much food we waste. And it's upsetting to do that and to know that there are people in the world and people now in the Gaza Strip who have literally nothing. They're eating animal feed and eating grass out of the ground. They're drinking salt water with no place to live. And to think that all you have to do is just stop the bombing campaign and everybody kind of just go back to their old way of life, there's no going back. There's no going back. There's rebuilding, which is needed, but then there's justice that has to come. It has to come. And until that happens, I'm sorry. We're going to see more and more violence. We're going to see more and more hostility, more and more, because you can't deprive people of food, water, electricity, medical supplies, health care, education, all of these things, and just think that you can just live in peace. That's not how that works. It's never worked that way in any context anywhere in the world. We have to make things right. We have to do what is right. We have to demand what is right. And we need to demand justice. I'm talking about environmental justice. I'm not talking about any kind of political solution or settlement or any kind of action on anybody's part. All I'm talking about is environmental justice. You need to make sure that whoever it is has whatever is needed to live the life that they were created to live. That's it. That's all you need to do. I don't have any um idea of what kind of arrangement it would have, what kind of shape it would take, but you need to provide it. You need to do it or be prepared for more hostility, more violence, more death, and more despair from the people who are suffering under the injustices that have continued for their whole lifetime. Their whole life has been like this. And so that's it. Peace will require environmental justice. Just think about that. No environmental justice, no peace. And that's it. I'll see you next time on the Environmental Justice Lab podcast, where we are for the people and for the planet. We'll see you next time.